Welcome to this explainer. Listen, if you've ever wrestled with a tiny Allen wrench, if you've ever argued with a partner over a highly confusing instruction manual, or, gotten wonderfully lost in a maze of perfectly staged living rooms, then you are already part of a massive global phenomenon. A phenomenon that fundamentally rewired modern consumer culture. Today, we are diving deep. We're going to break down the history, the hidden psychology, and the surprisingly complex corporate machinery of IKEA.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this empire today, just think about this number for a second. 45.1 billion euros. That is what they did in sales in fiscal year 2024 alone. We are talking about an absolute behemoth, operating more than 500 physical stores spread across 60 countries. And their websites pull in over 4.6 billion visitors a year. It's astronomical. But obviously, a retail footprint that massive didn't just magically materialize overnight. And it definitely didn't start in one of those sprawling blue and yellow big box stores we all know today. So how exactly does a 17-year-old kid build a global empire? Well, let's dive right into this mystery. Our story starts back in 1943 in the stony, heavily forested region of Småland, Sweden, with a teenager named Ingvar Kamprad. His father actually gave him a small sum of money as a reward for doing well in school, and Kamprad took that cash and just immediately set up a business. At first, he was literally just selling small everyday goods. Think pens, wallets, nylon stockings. But growing up in Småland, a place where people were literally famous for being resourceful and stretching a dollar, Kamprad was developing this incredibly sharp entrepreneurial mindset. Now, you might be wondering where the famous name actually comes from. IKEA isn't just some Swedish word for affordable furniture, it's actually a clever acronym. The empire literally bears its origins right in its name. It stands for the founder's initials I and K for Ingvar Kamprad, combined with E for Elmaterid, which was the family farm he was born on, and A for Aganariad, the nearby village where he grew up. He literally embedded his roots into the brand's DNA from day one. From there, the evolution was shockingly fast. Just 5 years in, around 1948, Kamprad makes this huge, pivotal pivot. He starts selling furniture. By 1950, out comes the very first annual IKEA home furnishing catalog. And his whole strategy right from the jump was incredibly simple: offer the absolute lowest prices in the land. He pulled this off through massive turnover, direct factory deliveries, and keeping his overhead just ridiculously low. Finally, on October 28, 1958, this mail-order concept became a reality when the very first physical IKEA store opened its doors in Älmhult, Sweden. But here is where we hit the real game changer. In those early days, Kamprad was completely bogged down by the astronomical costs and the massive damage rates of shipping traditional, fully built furniture through the mail. It was a logistical nightmare. His completely revolutionary solution? The flat pack. Now, to be fair, flatpack furniture did already exist, but it totally hadn't taken off in Sweden yet. IKEA officially adopted it in 1953. By literally just removing the empty air from the packaging and passing the assembly job onto the customer, IKEA slashed their transportation costs to the bone, practically wiped out shipping damage, and built a logistical moat that their competitors simply could not cross. And that leads us to the absolute core of what they do, a philosophy they officially coined later in 1995 called democratic design. It's like a giant high-stakes puzzle for their designers. Every single item must perfectly balance 5 specific dimensions: low price, good quality, function, form, and sustainability. If a prototype doesn't hit all 5 of those marks, which often requires some really crazy out-of-the-box thinking with manufacturing scales and raw materials, it is dead in the water. It just never reaches the shelf. Okay, now let's talk about why you can never seem to just run in and buy one thing. Their physical retail dominance relies on a massive psychological shift. Think about a normal store. You walk in, you make a beeline for the aisle you need, and you leave. Not here. These stores are intentionally designed as a one-way, counterclockwise maze that they internally call the long, natural way. You are completely forced to walk through these beautifully simulated living rooms and kitchens, basically experiencing the entire catalog before you ever get to the open-shelf market hall. It's exactly why you walk in for a $2 spatula and end up leaving with a cart completely overflowing with candles, pillows, and plants. We've all done it. But the crazy thing is, the psychology doesn't even stop when you leave the store. By forcing you to act as the final step in their manufacturing process, by making you build the flat pack furniture yourself, they inadvertently unlocked a heavily documented psychological phenomenon. It's actually called the IKEA effect. Behavioral researchers found that we actually value an item significantly more if we actively contributed to its creation, compared to buying the exact same item pre-assembled.
So you literally end up loving that bookshelf more just because you put your own blood, sweat, and tears into building it.
They also mastered another massive piece of customer psychology really early on. Kamprad was watching his stores and noticed a huge leaky bucket in his sales funnel. People were getting hungry, leaving the store to go find lunch, and completely breaking the buying spell. The result? Way fewer purchases. His realization was famously blunt. It's tough to do business on an empty stomach. And boom, that led to the invention of the fully equipped in-store restaurant in 1960. By serving up hot meals and classic Swedish meatballs, they made sure you stayed trapped, comfortably immersed, in the IKEA ecosystem for hours.
So, armed with these incredible logistical advantages and deep psychological hooks, the concept just spread like wildfire. They jumped over to Norway in 1963, then made a huge leap out of Scandinavia entirely by opening in Switzerland in 1973. From there, it was an absolute global blitz. Japan, West Germany, Canada, the United States in '85. Fast forward all the way to 2021, and they opened their largest physical store in the entire world in the Philippines. It really just proves how infinitely scalable this flat pack model actually is. Right, so as this empire started exploding in the 1980s, Kamprad wanted to guarantee the company's independence forever, what he actually called giving it eternal life. To do this, he engineered a notoriously complex corporate structure. He completely separated the day-to-day retail operations from the actual ownership of the brand. Today, the Inca Group runs the vast majority of the stores as a franchisee. They pay hefty royalties up to Inter-IKEA Systems, which is ultimately controlled by a foundation based in Liechtenstein. The whole point of this labyrinth was to totally protect the company from corporate takeovers and ensure they could always play the long game.
However, we have to look objectively at the full picture here, because this relentless, obsessive drive to keep costs down has resulted in some very serious operational failures. Back in the 1980s, the company utilized state-owned production facilities in East Germany to make some of their goods. Decades later, an independent Ernst & Young report, which IKEA actually commissioned themselves, revealed that a portion of the workforce at those contracted factories were political prisoners. In November 2012, the company formally admitted that they were aware of the possibility of forced labor at the time, and that they completely failed to exercise the control needed to identify and stop it.
And that incredibly complex financial structure we talked about, that's drawn some very intense public scrutiny as well. In 2009, there was a major investigation by the Swedish television network SVT. They reported that the 3% franchise royalty collected from every single store worldwide flows into Interrogo, that highly capitalized foundation in Liechtenstein, rather than into a traditional charitable foundation in the Netherlands, which is what the public widely believed at the time. The SVT report highlighted that this entity had quietly amassed $12 billion and was still firmly under the control of the Kamprad family. Navigating through those challenges, we arrive at the massive pivot of the modern digital era. For decades, the printed catalog was literally their Bible. It consumed 70% of their entire annual marketing budget. At its absolute peak in 2016, they were printing a staggering 200 million copies in 32 different languages. But by 2021, staring down the reality of global e-commerce and shifting consumer habits, they made the monumental call to permanently kill the print catalog after a 70-year run. A completely massive shift in strategy.
Because the reality is, today's consumer isn't always willing to drive 45 minutes out to a massive suburban warehouse. So what's the new playbook? First, they're launching smaller, highly curated inner-city formats in places like Vienna and China, specifically designed for people taking public transit. Second, they are leaning hard into tech. They acquired an AI startup called Geomagical Labs to build augmented reality apps so you can literally visualize a sofa in your living room before you buy it. And third, they're bridging the gap into consumer electronics, partnering with tech brands like Sonos to actually build smart audio right into their furniture. So, from a 17-year-old kid selling pens out of a mailbag in Smallland to a 45 billion euro global behemoth, this journey really is a masterclass in operational efficiency, deep customer psychology, and ruthless, continuous innovation. But as they pull away from mail-order catalogs and massive suburban mazes, moving toward augmented reality and inner-city pop-ups, it leaves us with one fascinating final question. As the very nature of how we shop fundamentally changes, will this 80-year-old flat-pack empire maintain its grip on how the world lives? Or will it need to completely rebuild itself from scratch for the digital age?